Good afternoon. Welcome to this session of the 19th Annual Six Bridges Book Festival. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are privileged to have two authors who have had books recently published about sports, two different sports written from two totally different perspectives. One an ancient sport, one a more modern sport. Dr. Karen Eva Carr's book is Shifting Currents, A World History of Swimming. And Rachel Simon's book is Pickleball for All, Everything But the Kitchen Sink. Both books are available locally from one of the Book Fest's longtime and very generous sponsors, Wordsworth Books in the Heights. Before we get started, please note that you will see some QR codes on your screen at different times. One can be scanned with your cell phone's camera, or you can just hold your cell phone up to the screen. It'll provide a link for your generous donations to help support this book festival. The second QR code is an evaluation that will appear toward the end of the session. There should also be a chat box function for your questions. I'm going to start with an introduction and questions for Dr. Karen Carr. Dr. Karen Carr lives and works in Portland, Oregon. She's an associate professor emerita at Portland State University. She grew up in upstate New York. Dr. Carr received her BA from Cornell and her MA and PhD from the University of Michigan in classical art and archaeology and in Roman history. Her other publications are Vandals to Visigoths, Rural Settlement Patterns in Early Medieval Spain, and a recent article, A Short History of Feather Fan Spread and Cultural Connotations from Bronze Age Africa to China and West to Europe. We're going to talk about Dr. Carr's book first, and then I will shift over to you, Rachel. Okay, Shifting Currents is the first modern comprehensive history of swimming. You spent 8 years of extensive research and writing, and I was amazed at how many references you had at the for your book and how many you cited. After reading your book, I certainly understand your selection of Shifting Currents as the title, since swimming takes so many turns in acceptance and rejection throughout recorded time. Would you briefly elaborate on this shift for our viewers?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, you can see reading it why it took 8 years, right? Because, I mean, there was a lot to learn for sure. And I mean, I think the reason this book was possible now was because we have the internet and it's much easier to search texts and find references to swimming than it would have been, even 10 years ago. Yeah. So that's, something I was able to take advantage of. So basically all over the world, people started out long ago as swimmers, and as social swimmers, as swimmers who swam together, whole groups, families swam together from babies to grandparents, all ages, every day. And that's been true all over Africa, North and South America, Southeast Asia, Australia. But further north in Europe and across Northern Asia, people felt it was too cold, I think, during the Ice Age, and they just stopped swimming. And after the Ice Age, when they realized that other people swam, they were like, that is weird. That's not something we're comfortable with. We're like afraid of the water. There's a big section of the book about associating the water with witchcraft, with floating women for witchcraft, because, that's an aspect of being afraid of the water. But when Northerners do learn to swim, they think of it as something that's really kind of limited to richer, more educated people who are going to be special. And they do it kind of performatively in formal lessons or for exercise, like lap swimming, and not in big family groups for fun. not with their friends. And they deliberately keep more marginalized groups out of the water to show that it's something that's for their in-group and not for everybody. And that tendency with colonialism, as Europeans and European descended people spread all over the world, they brought that idea with them, so that most of the traditional social swimmers in other parts of the world have now been forced out of the water by segregated beaches and pools, so that we have this flip where the Europeans and Northerners who weren't swimmers in the beginning, now with the shifting currents, have become the swimmers. And many people think that Black people, many people still think that Black people are physically incapable of swimming, that they'll sink, even though that is 100% not even a little bit true. And in fact, throughout history, Black people were better swimmers for the most part. So I would like us, I sort of wrote the book with the idea that maybe we could go back to that older situation where everybody could swim and have a good time, and it wouldn't be a marker of a limited group of people.
Okay. I was curious why you selected swimming as the subject of this book.
It wasn't, I was just going to write a really short little article about the history of swimming for a kids website that I was running. It was hot and I was going to take the kids swimming, and I thought, I'll just write a little article about swimming for today's article. And then when I went to find out about it, there was like nothing there. Nobody had really done a serious history of swimming for me to read, to use in my article. So I was like, well, I'll write one. It took longer than I thought it would and was more complicated, but that's how I got started. But it was so interesting once I got started that I really wanted to keep going with it.
I think in another interview, you may have indicated that there was not very much information from an indigenous standpoint for you to access.
Exactly. People who had written about swimming had mostly written like the Greeks were swimmers, the Romans were swimmers, Lord Byron swam across the Hellespont, then the Olympics, and like competitive swimming, right? So there were books that basically told that story, but I was like, what about the rest of the world? Like, do we not know about swimming in ancient China and swimming in ancient Japan and swimming in Russia and in Africa and in the Americas? Like, there's a lot more to say than just the Greeks, Romans, and Byron. So that was kind of what I set out to do.
Okay. I did appreciate the illustrations throughout the book, depicting swimming throughout history. I think they really augmented the book. And I was wondering how much your love of archaeology influenced your selection of swimming and the illustrations you selected.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. You can see I'm an archaeologist because I can't talk without pictures, right? I can't. I don't. Pictures to me seem like part of the story so much that I couldn't really imagine doing it without them. And actually, I'm glad you say that you really liked the pictures, because it was something that there was a lot of negotiating about with the publisher about whether any of them would be in color and how many there would be. It's very expensive to put pictures into a book. And every time I gave them a draft of it, they would be like, wow, we kind of like it a little better than we did before. We'll add more pictures. And so they kept adding more pictures. And it wasn't until the very end that they said, oh, and we'll put in a bunch of color pictures. We'll put in more colored pictures. So it kept improving. So I'm glad to hear that you like it. I'm writing a new book now, and I promised the publisher that it wouldn't involve a lot of pictures, but I'm like, I'm realizing that I'm really not that person. Like I feel like you can't really tell the story without the pictures. So it's in the pictures that you see how people felt about swimming.
Yes. in writing this book, what did you uncover as you researched and wrote, and what did you discover about yourself? I think that's a question you've been asked in another interview, or it may have been on your blog.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I had no idea when I started this that there was going to be this whole, as you say, shifting current, right? That there was going to be this change. I thought, like anybody else, that the Greeks and Romans were great swimmers and that, they had always been great swimmers. And it wasn't until I started to look at it more that I was like, whoa, there is like no evidence that the Greeks and Romans, and certainly people before the Greeks and Romans in the Bronze Age in Europe, that they were swimmers at all, that they were not very good swimmers. Everywhere else in the world, there's all these talk about people swimming a mile, or people saving each other, or just having a good time in the water, swimming far out from the shore and surfing in on the waves. And you just don't get that. In European accounts, maybe they swim like across a small river. But then, like, all right, in the European accounts, for example, like a lot of them start with, he was swimming in the pond, but then it got over his head, so he drowned. And I'm like, if you drown when the water gets over your head, that's not really swimming.
Right. You're just waiting.
You're just waiting, right? So there's an awful lot of that people report as swimming, but like clearly they're not really swimming.
Yes.
Like one of Captain Cook's men, I remember in Hawaii, was trying to get across the island, and they were like, and he was doing really well. He was crossing the river, and then or the pond or whatever it was, and then it got over his head, and like all kinds of terrible things happened. But clearly he can't actually swim. So it was very unexpected to me that I could have gotten, that I knew this story. I thought I knew this story about the Greeks and the Romans and Byron, and then it was so wrong. But at the same time, it really made me feel that this was an important thing to be doing. And when you asked how it made me feel about myself, and I think that, one thing I really learned about myself was that I also, don't really swim socially, right? That, like, my friends don't call me up and be like, hey, like Saturday night, let's go swimming. People swim I swim for exercise. I swam with my children when I was teaching them to swim, but I don't really swim with my friends. And that is sad. I think that's sad. I think it would be nice if we all could swim together with our friends.
Yes. Okay. Did you get to travel to other parts of the world when you were doing your research for this book, or was most of your research done online? Or through libraries?
Right, in libraries, a lot of it in libraries. And I was lucky enough to be in Providence at Brown, and able to use their big library, which was a big help. But a lot of it was written during COVID, so there was no traveling.
Yes.
Many of the places that are mentioned in the book and the objects that are described in the book, I had seen earlier before COVID started. So I don't know if I had traveled specifically for the book, but I had seen a lot of those things in person, which does make a difference. I mean, I think it's easy to misinterpret things if you haven't seen them yourself.
Yes. What is the most important concept you would like the reader to consider through your book?
Well, is it okay if I bring in the pickleball book already, Rachel's book?
Sure.
Because what I was thinking, like, what do these two books have in common? Why did the festival put them together? And I thought that Rachel in the pickleball book really emphasizes how pickleball brings people together and is a leveler, and is something that everybody can enjoy together. And I realized I really feel that way about Shifting Currents too, that what I would really like is for people to take away the message that swimming can be more than just exercise swimming laps, or more than giving your kids lessons so that they won't drown if they fall out of a boat sometime, and can be a fun social activity like pickleball.
Mhm.
And that I wish it would be more like pickleball, where people could, get together and not feel that they were using it to divide from each other, but instead using it to come together.
Okay. Um, I was interested in your chapter about the floating witches and the dunking stools. I had never heard of that. It was new to me. Would you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the ways that you see this fear of the water that Northerners have is that they are inclined from the Bronze Age on, not just in the early modern period, but really from the Bronze Age to now, they're inclined to feel that there's something kind of uncanny and witchy about the water. And one of the ways that that's reflected is that when you suspect someone of witchcraft, you throw them in the water. And depending on what happens, and different cultures have different ideas about what should happen, but it tells you whether the person is a witch or not. If they sink, sometimes some people say if they sink, they're a witch. Other people say if they float, they're a witch. But either way, what you're seeing is this sense that the water is itself magical and kind of dangerous. And the ducking stools are kind of an outgrowth of that, where when women are too outspoken, um, or I think by outspoken usually we mean things like they're standing in front of their neighbor's house shrieking cuss words at them or something. They're really being kind of a nuisance to the community. They could be tied to a stool and dipped into the water by force, and sort of, it's kind of like waterboarding. It's a lot
Yes.
like waterboarding, right? They're being sort of half drowned. Every once in a while, somebody would actually drown. And both of these, throwing witches into the water to see if they would float, and also ducking women to sort of waterboard them, were sort of popular. You can kind of see that they're popular partly because people want to know if they're witches, they want women to be quiet, but they're also popular because it's exciting to go down to the river and see this big struggle and all this splashing,
Yeah.
and hundreds of people come, and they're always kind of like, we did it, but then we weren't really sure if it was like a good try, so we decided to do it again next week. And I'm like, you guys just decided it would be fun to do it again next week. You didn't, they're always kind of going back and forth between, is this a party? Is it a kind of entertainment? Or is it, but in any case, all of it reflects this fear of the water. That in southern places, people sometimes where people swim more, they sometimes use the water to see if someone is guilty or innocent. But they do it differently. They make both people swim. They make the accuser and the accused like race across the river, and the first one to get there is the one that's telling the truth. Or they make them both hold their breath underwater, and the first one that comes up is the liar. But that's a different feeling. That's not the water being dangerous. It's just a different way of thinking about water.
Would you mind telling us a little bit more about the concept of swimming being used as a justification for enslaving indigenous peoples?
Oh yeah, there's another shifting current, right? Where the Europeans get to Africa, and they've come there as slave dealers. The first Europeans that are going around West Africa and East Africa, they've come there in order to enslave people. They are slave dealers. And they see people swimming they're like, this is incredible swimming. I never saw anybody swim like this. They're full of admiration for the incredible skill and diving. And they're like, and you know what this really shows about these Black Africans who are swimming? It shows that they're animals, that they're
Yeah.
not fully human because they can swim. Like dogs could swim, you know, horses can swim, other people who aren't fully human can swim, and that's why it's okay to enslave them. And so the initial enslavement of lots of Africans was justified by them being such good swimmers. And in fact, you see in the advertisements, in the auctions and things, that people are advertising that this specific enslaved person is a very good swimmer because people wanted that. You know, they wanted someone who would be able to clear stumps out of their pond and things like that. So they're looking for swimmers. And it's not until several hundred years later in the 19th century that it switches and you get white people saying swimming is for us and Black people can't get in the water at all. And people forget that it used to be the other way around, and they think, oh no, white people can swim and Black people can't swim. Today, and that's where we are today. I mean, the Black children drown at much higher rates, I think 5 times as often as white children, largely because they don't learn how to swim.
And then you also had a quote from Plato, among others, that equated being able to read and swim as a separation. It separates, I guess, the higher class from the lower class.
Oh yeah, like the same way that we would say that someone is ignorant, they don't know how to read or write, right? Which would be like an ordinary thing for us to say. But apparently in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, people said that same guy couldn't read or swim because swimming was something that they really identified with the upper class.
Yes.
And, you know, Plato is saying, you know, what he's making the argument that you could be potentially a good leader even if you come from the lower classes. So he's saying even if someone doesn't know how to read or how to swim, we shouldn't forget that they might be a good leader anyway. But he means that they're not educated upper class people. Mm-hmm. And then we hear it about the Emperor Augustus a little later on, that he taught his grandchildren to read and to swim because he wants them to be educated people.
Mm-hmm. Are you willing to share with us the project you're working on?
I'd love to. I'm not as good at talking about it yet as I am about the swimming book because I haven't had as much practice, but I'll try.
Okay.
I'm writing about the beginning of using coinage, like silver coins, when silver's invented, and how that changes the way people think about women in antiquity. Because before the use of coins, a lot of what people are using as money is beads, pearls, shells, seashells, and what becomes known later as trade cloth, right? Different kinds of luxury cloth that people use as a kind of money. And changing over to using coins, kind of a lot of those early kinds of money, like cloth, are produced largely by women, but coins are produced largely by men, right? It's men who go down in the mine and dig up the silver and make the coins. And so that really changes the way people think about women, from women are the ones who make money, women are productive and useful, and you know, they create things that are valuable, to an idea where women are shoppers. Women just get things that are, you know, they're always demanding fancy dresses and jewelry, and they don't do anything useful. And it's not that either of those things is completely true, but it's a different way of thinking about women. And I want to show that we still have that with us today. This idea that women are sort of greedy and lazy rather than productive.
Okay, we're going to need to switch to Rachel soon, but I did have one question that a viewer posed, and Tiffany states, were there gender differences in views of or participation in swimming in different cultures?
That's a really great question, because I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people characterizing my book as being about gender differences in swimming. Like they're like, oh, it's about differences in race and in geographic location and in gender. And I'm like, it's not about gender. Like, I did not find any big differences in gender in swimming. No, in swimming cultures, both men and women swim, and in non-swimming cultures, neither men nor women swim. And it seems to be, pretty equal everywhere. I think people get that idea because in the late 19th, early 20th century, with the suffragettes and the sort of women's rights movement of that time, first wave feminism, right? That swimming, because at the same time women were fighting for their rights and also swimming was a big deal, a lot of that fight centered around swimming and being able to wear swimsuits and go to pools that had been reserved for men and stuff. But other than that one moment in history, no, women in swimming cultures, women swim as well as men, and in non-swimming cultures, women don't swim like men don't swim.
Okay, thank you so much. And we're going to shift over to Rachel now. You with us, Rachel?
I am.
Okay. Rachel Simon resides in Raleigh, North Carolina now, but she's a New York native. Rachel studied writing, literature, and publishing at NYU and graduated from Emerson College. She's written for the New York Times, Glamour, NBC News Think, and the Daily Beast, among others. She has worked on or is currently working as an editor for several publications. She's a writing teacher for Gotham Writers Workshop and Redbud, a consultant, a cruciverbalist, one who is skillful in constructing or solving crossword puzzles. Rachel constructs personalized crossword puzzles and sells them on Etsy. And I'm like, my goodness, you are a whirlwind. You wrote an article for the New York Times entitled, Is Pickleball the Perfect Pandemic Pastime? Did writing that article spur you on to write this most comprehensive book about pickleball? It's very comprehensive. I enjoyed reading it, and it's a book that I would probably want to gift to a beginner.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And yes, that article definitely inspired this book. I wrote that article in May 2020, so very early on in the pandemic. And I wrote the article because, like many, many other people out there, as I discovered, my husband and his family and I were all quarantining together, looking for an activity that was fun and different because we were all very bored and stuck at home, but that also could be done with people of different ages and different athletic abilities and was easy to set up from home. And pickleball just kind of fit the bill. And as I got into it, I started realizing how great a sport it was for that particular moment in time, since it didn't cost much to set up. You could social distance while playing it. And again, it did bring together people of all ages and backgrounds. And so I wrote that article for the New York Times. And when that got some traction and did pretty well, I wrote a few more articles about pickleball over the years. And eventually those caught the eyes of my publishers at HarperCollins. And they were interested in putting out a book all about pickleball. And as you said, a comprehensive book that really covers the history of the game, how it became so popular in recent years, but as well as strategies, stories from players, and a look at where it's going in the future. But yeah, that article was the one that inspired it all.
Okay. Have you ever thought about, I hear so many people say pickleball is addictive. Have you ever thought about how a sport becomes addictive?
That's a great question. I can't speak for all sports, but I can say for pickleball, I think the addictive nature of it comes largely down to the community element. I think something Karen mentioned a little bit in her, in her talk, that pickleball has a very, very passionate community of players who have so much fun playing the game. Like, you ask anyone who plays, whether it's very casually, they've only played a few times, or whether they devote hours of their life every day to the game, they have a great time meeting other people, talking to them, competing against them, even if they just walked onto the court that morning. And I think that's one of the main reasons the game is so addictive. Is not just it's, physically fun to play, but that you just have a great time doing it and being a part of that larger community.
I agree totally. And I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that having the pickleball courts we have here in Little Rock was a lifesaver for them during the pandemic. So I've seen that firsthand. Um, this is a question for me. Do you ever wish pickleball had been given a different name to escape some of the ridicule aimed at it?
That, I have thought about that. I think I personally like the name because I think it adds to kind of the fun and like more kind of lighthearted, silly nature of the game. But I do understand that for some players, especially those working in organizations that are really trying to get pickleball more credibility, maybe help it get into the Olympics one day, or just kind of be taken more seriously, that the name can be a little bit of a hindrance. So I do understand that. I personally think it's fun though.
Okay. What do you think about the increase in media coverage extending to the mainstream networks? Do you
I
watch
think it's really,
pickleball tournaments?
I have seen some. I haven't gone to any in person, and I definitely need to, because when I researching the book, that was one of the things that I was so fascinated by, and I really hadn't known much about beforehand, is just how these pickleball tournaments can be week-long events that are tons of fun, that have music and activities and games and dinners and things that are people go there and just have a great time and basically go as a vacation, whether or not they're competing themselves, or they just want to watch and hang out. So I think that I love that those are getting more coverage, because they are really fun. But in addition to being fun, they're really great showcases for how good some of these players are, and just how competitive they are and how talented. And I'm glad that more people are seeing that, because I think it all just helps to give the sport more credibility and just bring it to more people's attention.
I agree. And my follow-up question to this is, recently Tom Brady, football player, and Kim Clijsters, uh, former tennis pro who won 4 Grand Slams, have gone in together with some others to create a sports team. They're going to have a Major League Pickleball. Do you think that this is going to help or hurt pickleball?
I think it's a little hard to tell at this point, because the world of pickleball has been moving incredibly fast, with major moves like this happening very constantly. So I think it's a little hard to tell. I'm leaning towards it's a positive thing. I think at least in the short term, it's very positive, because I think it's bringing a lot of much needed attention to the sport. People hear that Tom Brady is investing, LeBron James also invested. There's
Yes.
a lot of top athletes doing this, and top names, that I think it definitely helps people recognize that this isn't going anywhere, and that it's something that people are taking very seriously. So I think that's a great thing. I think it kind of remains to be seen how it all shapes out in terms of the organization of it, or if there's, too many different leagues, or how people, get involved. But I think right now it's definitely only helping, and helping pickleball get more and more known.
As an aside here, the franchise that Tom Brady and Kim Clijsters have started is 50% female owned. So they are dedicated to gender equality, and I think that's commendable. In researching your book, did you perceive animosity between the tennis establishment and the pickleball crowd?
So it's funny, when I was researching, I wasn't finding that at all. But I think it's just, and now it obviously has been talked about a lot and is definitely a thing. But I think the fact that it wasn't as much when I was researching, which wasn't even super, super long ago, says something to how fast pickleball is moving, and how rapidly it's growing. Because when I was researching, it was most of what I was hearing from tennis players was, yeah, this is great to have another sport that I'm interested in, or gee, it's just great to see more people getting involved. I think in the months since then, pickleball has expanded so rapidly that there is definitely some, some animosity between the two types of players. I think that it's understandable right now because I think there are, as we've seen, pickleball is growing so fast that there's just not enough courts available. So they're changing tennis courts into pickleball courts, and
Yes.
and obviously some tennis players are not happy with that. But again, I think that's very understandable. But I don't think that's going to be a permanent issue. I think that will definitely kind of settle down in the next couple months and maybe years, just as pickleball, just the current momentum maybe slows down a little bit and just becomes more established as a sport, as a regular sport. I think that we'll find that there's enough courts for everyone, and that people will be able to enjoy their sports in peace.
Okay. And just as another aside, the vast majority of really excellent pickleball players I know were former tennis players, and or some of them still do play tennis. But it seems like virtually all the professional pickleball players came from a tennis background.
A lot of them, definitely. I wouldn't say all, but it's definitely very common. I think for a lot of former tennis players, it makes sense just because there are a lot of similarities in the sports. They're not identical by any means, but there are some similarities. So they already kind of have a little bit of the upper hand there. And a lot of them just want to continue playing sports, but tennis took a really tough physical toll on their bodies. Pickleball is usually a little bit easier on the body. You still absolutely get a workout from it. And it's not to say that injuries can't happen or that, it's not hard, but it is definitely overall easier on the body than tennis. So you do see a lot of that crossover.
Yes. With the exponential growth of pickleball, have you observed any shortcomings that you would say in the growth? Where
I think
things are.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think right now, just kind of going back to that point about how has been growing just so rapidly, is that there's a little bit of disorganization right now in terms of who's really in charge and what the governing bodies are and how it's all working. But I think, again, that's completely understandable for a sport that, while not new by any means, it's been around for several decades, has been having this major recent surge. I think it's growing pains. I think it just needs a little bit more time for that to be figured out. So that would be the only thing right now, I think, is just kind of, or different organizations that all have the best intentions and want to be involved with pickleball and are involved with pickleball, just kind of needing to sort out amongst themselves who's controlling what and what the differences are and how that's going to work. But I think that's going to kind of figure itself out in not too long from now.
Well, here in Arkansas, I don't know if it's just a regional thing, but the one thing I've observed that I wish could be rectified is that there are no programs for youth, and there's virtually no pickleball in the school system, which I think it would be wonderful for the middle school, junior high age to be exposed to pickleball, because it's such a fun sport, a social sport, and everyone can succeed at playing pickleball. So I don't know whether you have that situation in Raleigh or not, as far as the school system.
I'm not sure about the Raleigh school system, but I will say that USA Pickleball, one of the governing bodies, is putting forth a kids pickleball program. That's a major initiative they had for this year, just because while pickleball is played in plenty of schools across the country, it's not uniform. And as you said, there's not a ton of real youth programs for it in a lot of areas in the country. But that's definitely something that a lot of the organizations are prioritizing, to get more kids involved, to get more teenagers involved. I mean, the juniors pickleball world, which is kind of the under 18 set, is very competitive and very active. It's just right now still kind of looking for ways to kind of make it a little bit more organized and to give them some structure there. But it's definitely in the works and a priority for a lot of people.
Yeah. When you were researching your book, would you share with us for your best tip or your favorite quote you got in your interviews?
Sure. I think some of the really great tips that I got include, well, one that I found from a lot of pro players, many of whom, as you mentioned, were former tennis players, say that pickleball, you can't go into pickleball thinking that it's an exact replica of tennis or any other sport, despite there being similarities. And there are similarities for sure. It's still its own unique sport. And a lot of tennis players go in thinking, I just have to hit this ball with as much power, force as I possibly can because that worked in tennis. And that doesn't work in pickleball. It's not really about, for the most part, how hard you hit the ball. It's about accuracy. It's about lining up your shots perfectly. It's about thinking ahead. I this isn't from someone I got in the book, but actually someone I was speaking to not long ago who was comparing pickleball not as much to those other sports like tennis and racquetball and ping pong and badminton, like you might think, but to chess, and saying that pickleball is really a sport about planning ahead again and thinking about where your opponent's going to be and just kind of getting a couple of moves ahead in your mind. So I think that's something that a lot of people come in maybe a little cocky about and think, oh, I know how to play tennis. I know I'm gonna just hit that ball hard and it's gonna work. And then find themselves getting beaten and not understanding why it happens, and then having to take that step back to realize that it's not power, but it's accuracy and that planning that's more important.
Okay. For me, pickleball is a form of exercise I enjoy and don't even think of it when I'm playing as being exercise, but it's just so much fun. And that does, I think that's a good thing for older people to be able to keep their movements and whatever and enjoy themselves at the same time. Do you think that pickleball will become an Olympic sport in the next decade?
I think it will. There's a big push to get it in the 2028 Olympic Games. And if that doesn't happen, then the 2032 Games, I think for sure. Right now, it's just that it needs to just get enough international support. It has that support in the US and in some other countries. Pickleball is played very widely across Europe, in Canada, in Mexico, and many other nations, but it's still working on getting kind of some of the organizing organizations are working to still get enough support from some of those other countries across the world enough to have it qualify as that Olympic sport. But it's definitely a work in progress, and I see it happening absolutely.
Okay, I think you stated in your book that in order to qualify for the Olympics, a sport has to be played in 75 countries. And currently, there are only 70 countries that it's being played in. So it does appear that there will be a very good possibility that it'll make it in the Olympics in the next two cycles.
I think so.
Do you have another book or project you're working on or contemplating?
I'm kind of in between the contemplating and working phase. I have been working on and off for a number of years, currently in the off mode on a novel, very different than this book, a novel, kind of a young adult novel set in high school, set in a very competitive high school and following a teenage girl who's really just struggling with anxiety and friendships and pressure about colleges and all that. So it's a very, very much a work in progress. Again, it's been a passion project for many years, and I've come to it and left it a million times. And right now I'm taking a little break from it, but I'm 100% plan to come back, and that's going to be a big focus soon.
Okay. I do have an article that you wrote that was published in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Getting married, play some pickleball. I enjoyed your article. Would y'all be okay for trying a lightning round as much as you can do a lightning round on Zoom?
Sure.
Okay. I'll say, Karen, your favorite, archaeology, research, teaching, or writing?
I think I'd say research.
Research.
What if I could choose what I was going to do when I get up in the morning? I just like to read a lot of things and try to figure out the answer to a question.
Okay. Rachel, writing, research, teaching writing, designing crosswords, or editing?
Definitely writing. I love all of those things, although maybe research not as much. That probably goes at the bottom of the list for me.
Okay.
I mean, I love teaching. I love doing my crosswords. Those are both really important to me, but writing is at the heart of everything I do, and that's something I could never leave behind.
Okay. Karen, your favorite modern day swimmer?
Oh, I don't know anything about modern day swimmers
Okay.
at all. I'm totally out of the loop when it comes to, I mean, Michael Phelps, right? I have no idea.
I would think he's probably the most famous
Right.
of swimmers.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a thing to emphasize about my book that it kind of cuts off at the point where it would be about modern swimmers. There are plenty of other books about that.
Yes. Um, Rachel, your favorite pickleball player?
I can't say I have a favorite because, I interviewed so many great ones for the book that I really couldn't pick a favorite. But I mean, some of the players that I interviewed for the book that I really loved hearing their stories were like Irina Terashenko, Jesse Irvine, Zane Navratil, just players who have really different backgrounds, really different skill sets, but are at the top of their game. And what I love talking to those three about especially was just how much they were using their pickleball success to not only help their own game, but really spread word of it to other people, teaching pickleball, opening clinics, working to get it, played in more countries. It was just really cool to see how dedicated they were to spreading the word of the game.
Okay. I think you interviewed Catherine Parenteau also for your book. She
Great
does
too.
have an Arkansas tie. She played 1 year of tennis at the University of Arkansas, and then she went on to, I guess it was either the University of Michigan or Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
But my favorite player is Anna Lee Waters. I don't know if you've watched her much at all, but she's 15 years old and she's an incredible player. She's so aggressive. Karen, would you rather write a book or write an article?
They're different. I like writing a book, but I think totally for like impractical social, I mean, because if you're writing a book, people leave you alone for like a decade to do it and you don't have like all these deadlines. Whereas if you write an article, it's all like short deadline. On the other hand, the article gets done and a lot of people read it, and it's nice to have people reading your work and not be working all alone. So I mean, they both have pros and cons.
Okay. And Rachel, the exact same question. Would you rather write a book or write an article?
I agree with Karen. It's a lot of pros and cons. There's a lot of pros and cons to both. I mean, I obviously primarily write articles. This is my first book, and it's a very different book than I think a lot of my future books will likely be. So it's hard to say for sure. I mean, I loved writing the book. I loved having something, physical in my hands that I could, that I could always have and hold, and that could be in people's homes. So I think that's really a wonderful thing that's so unique. But, I also do love, as kind of as Karen was saying, like the immediacy of articles and being able to kind of share them so widely and write about a lot of different topics.
We do have quite a few questions that are popping up in the chat box. Mark asked the question, he states, I know nothing about pickleball. Can you give a 2-minute description of the game?
Sure. So pickleball is, like I was saying before, kind of a mix in some ways of a lot of other sports. It has elements of tennis, of badminton, of ping pong, of racquetball, but it is still its own unique sport. It's played on a kind of badminton-sized court. There's a net. You're playing it either individually or in teams of two. And your goal is just to hit the ball back and forth over the net until one team reaches 11 points with at least up by 2 of those points. And it's, again, you're playing with paddles, not rackets. And like I was saying earlier, it's much more focused on that accuracy and timing your shots than power. But it's a game that really can look slower than it actually is, because a lot of times you're really just kind of volleying slowly back and forth, or what you'll call dinking in pickleball. But it can still require a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of, running back and forth. So it's a lot of fun, and as you were saying earlier, a great exercise too.
Okay, are you a dinker or a banger?
I think a dinker.
Okay. I'm more
can
a
I
banger.
just squeeze in a question real quick?
Sure.
Sure. I wonder, Rachel, can you talk about, Tiffany asked me about gender, and I'm just wondering, like, where does gender come into pickleball? Do people split up? Can women play against men?
Yeah, that's a great question. So pickleball is really cool in that regard, is in that, unlike most other sports, it's fairly equal, both in terms of people's interests in the, when it's just women competing, in a lot of other sports, obviously, when it's just men, that gets a lot more viewer interest or a lot more, sponsorships and whatnot, but also in the pay. A lot of the organizations, the professional leagues will pay both the women and men equally, which is really cool. And in terms of actually playing, it's both. Sometimes it's split up, sometimes it's not. If you can, there are, men's singles, men's doubles, women's singles, women's doubles, just like in tennis and whatnot, but there's also mixed doubles, and that's very, very popular. And you'll see women and men playing together, and like I said, mixed doubles is extremely popular, just as much, if not even more so, than when it's split by gender.
Thanks.
I agree. I think pickleball is the great equalizer of sports. It really is. We did have another question from Glenn about where pickleball courts are in Little Rock, and we do have 6 courts at Canis Park. We have courts at Meriwether. They're marked on existing tennis courts. And then there are some private clubs that have courts here, as well as some neighborhoods. Let me see if we have any more questions here. I think that's our last question from our listeners. Is there anything else either one of you would like to say about your book? I'll let Karen go first.
I just wanted to end up by repeating that, there's been a lot of articles recently, a lot of people talking about an epidemic of loneliness and isolation in the United States and really all over the world, and the pandemic making it a lot worse. And that I think pickleball is a great step towards fighting that, bringing people together and helping us heal. And then I hope that swimming will be able to develop more in that direction, and that whether or not it's through pickleball or through swimming or through something else, that we'll all try to find ways to reach out to each other, to hang out with each other, to play games together, make friends, and make sure that everybody has friends to hang out with.
Oh, okay, that's a great point. Rachel, do you have anything you would like to add?
I think just kind of almost echoing Karen's point there, that pickleball, or as you said too, pickleball is that kind of great equalizer, where one of the reasons, I wrote this book is just not just because, it's become so popular, but that it's really something everyone can enjoy. And I don't know a single person truly who has tried it and not been into it at least a little bit. And they're finding, you can play, you can play, with your 10-year-olds, but you can also play with your 80-year-old parents, or if you want, you can, play all different ages, all different backgrounds, genders, as we've said, all different athletic abilities. Even the fact that wheelchair pickleball is very, very popular, and that community is really able to play as well. I think pickleball really is a sport that's about bringing people together and being able to be enjoyed by all. And I think that's something that really is special, that a lot of other sports, even very popular sports, don't have the same way. And it's also emphasized in kind of the camaraderie between players. One thing I heard over and over again in the book from both professional, like top level professional players, as well as more amateurs, is that everyone is nice to each other and gets along in that community, that there's not the same level of like, we don't talk to each other at the top level that you might find in a lot of other sports. Even at the tournaments, the very top pros will happily hang out with each other and trade tips and get to know each other, because they're all just happy to play this sport and to be giving it more attention and to get more people involved. And I think that's something that's really unique and really special.
I agree. We have 2 Facebook pages for Central Arkansas. One is Central Arkansas Pickleball, and there are 2,300 people on that, in that group. And then we have another group that's Arkansas Pickleball, and it has around 1,000. So it's become very popular. We use the GroupMe app to communicate about our league, and about who's going to be at the courts and who's not. It's like you've said, a very social sport, and I think it's meant a lot to people to have something like this sport to engage in during the pandemic. I've about run out of questions for both of you. We really thank our guests for being with us today, and we thank our two writers, Dr. Karen Carr and Rachel Simon. It's been a pleasure to talk with you both. We hope that our listeners and viewers will join us for more sessions this week. The book festival runs through Sunday the 30th. And again, the Six Bridges Book Festival appreciates your support. And if you enjoyed this program and would like to help support the Central Arkansas Library System, they have festival programs. Please make your most generous donation today by snapping a photo of the QR code. I'd also like to thank the Zoom squad here at the Central Arkansas Library System. They've been very helpful in getting us online, even after our fire alarm here. But do either of y'all have any more closing remarks? You're welcome to say anything you'd like.
I would just say on my end that I think that I really hope, of course, that you all go out and check out my book. But I would say even if you don't play pickleball yourself, or are skeptical or have never tried it, there is bound to be someone in your life who does, whether it's your spouse or friend or parent or aunt and uncle or grandparent. It's so popular now that I definitely suggest picking up a copy for them. It's a great holiday present, I gotta say, and just kind of spreading the word to everyone in your life who's really loves it. And I'm sure Karen would say the same for swimming.
I'm sure I would.
My husband will not play pickleball with me. He's a golfer and he thinks he'll hurt himself, so he will not play pickleball. Well, I guess at this point we will close our session. And again, thank you both so much for being with us today. We've enjoyed our conversation here, and it was a pleasure having you both with us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And once again, to remind our viewers, you can purchase both books at Wordsworth Books in the Heights. Thank you.
Hey, bye.